Welcome to Unremembered Hollywood, but that's another story. Remember when I said, Arbuckle resented the ape so much that he pulled a gun on Mr. Buttons at Lillian Gish's birthday party, but that's a different story. Well, here you go. On October 14th, 1919, Lillian Gish welcomed Hollywood's biggest stars to her West Adams home for her 26th birthday. Everyone who was anyone was there. Harold Lloyd, Rudolph Valentino, even Theda Bara. Lillian was in good spirits, with her new movie, Typhoid Mary vs. Jack Johnson, headed to theaters that coming weekend. The film, which told the story of a boxing match between the two most dangerous people in America, was her ticket to the A-list. Or so she thought. From an interview in the mid-1980s, she described the film, now sadly lost to history.
Oh, that was supposed to be the one. Jack Johnson couldn't have been nicer. I remember when we were filming the final scene, where Jack is dying of typhus that he'd gotten during the fight, and he said something I'll never forget. Lillian, this picture is god-awful and we never should have agreed to it. I was just astonished at his ability to stay in character saying delirious things like that.
As it turns out, Jack Johnson was right. The picture was a complete turkey. Daily Variety critic Bernard Keller wrote,
After viewing Mr. Johnson and Miss Gish duke it out in this dreadful boxing picture, one must conclude that it would be preferable to die of typhus than to watch this picture again.
Keller got his wish as he died of typhus 2 weeks later. In her stately home, surrounded by all her fabulous friends, Gish was ready to celebrate. She was savoring a glass of champagne when Norma Talmadge walked up.
Lillian, dear, I just had the most wonderful idea. I'll have Mac bring around Mr. Buttons.
The more the merrier.
Woo! This'll be a real pip.
If you'll recall, Mr. Buttons was the star of Stinky Goes Bananas for Justice. His portrayal of Stinky, the chimpanzee lawyer who took on a greedy banana plantation owner who wouldn't let Stinky and his friends have any bananas, had made him the toast of the town. He also earned a Best Actor nomination at the Hollywood Film Awards, the precursor to the Oscars. When he arrived at the party in an adorable little chimpanzee tuxedo, the assembled stars became starstruck fans. Rudolph Valentino told his biographer,
I knew as soon as I put my eyes onto Mr. Buttons that my days as the #1 sex man to all the people of the world were going to be ended.
Mr. Buttons lapped up the attention and the booze at the party. By all accounts, he was pretty wobbly on his feet 30 minutes after arriving, which delighted the crowd even more. Lillian was cheering the loudest, until she saw a brand new 1919 Pierce Arrow 66A4 touring car pull into her driveway.
Oh, fuck.
In all the excitement, Lillian had forgotten she invited Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle to the party as well. Roscoe had been sure that his serious turn in Stinky Goes Bananas was going to net him a Best Actor nomination. He played Mr. Button's courtroom adversary, a thinly fictionalized version of Clarence Darrow named Clarence N. Darrow. His monologue, in defense of his client, was said to be transcendently delivered, but without sound that didn't really come across. Audiences grew bored during the monologue, which consisted of over 8 uninterrupted minutes of title cards. When the nominations were announced, Arbuckle was crushed. He told Mac Sennett, the director of the film,
This was my shot, Mac. Might as well just let my behavior deteriorate until it ruins my career.
Arbuckle locked eyes with Mr. Buttons immediately. As the ape grinned widely, Arbuckle's expression soured.
Somebody call animal control. There's an overacting monkey on the loose.
Mr. Buttons smiled widely and turned his back on the seething Arbuckle.
Roscoe, my friend, welcome. Let's get you a refreshment.
My performance in Stinky Goes Bananas was called refreshing. And yet here I am, left only with the adoration of the entire country, my millions of dollars, and all these mistresses.
Mr. Buttons smiled even wider and laughed.
Before we knew it, Fat Man Arbuckle take out a small pistol from his jacket and point it at my friend Mr. Buttons. Everyone at party say gasp. I didn't think, I just grabbed the gun and take it. I'm a very dashing sex man.
Arbuckle, embarrassed but not cowed, took off his driving gloves. He approached Mr. Buttons and slapped him across the face with them. Mr. Buttons took off his tuxedo jacket and bow tie and squared up to fight.
Roscoe! Mr. Buttons! Please! Don't fight! Not on my birthday!
Arbuckle and Mr. Buttons ignored Lillian and squared off. They circled each other for a while, waving their fists in that old-timey boxing style. It seemed like a stalemate until D.W. Griffith walked up and shouted,
"Somebody punch somebody!" "Hey, why is Roscoe fighting that monkey?"
Then it was on. Arbuckle landed the first blow, knocking Mr. Buttons back on his heels.
This one's for old Charlie Darwin.
Incensed, Mr. Buttons wound up and knocked Arbuckle out with a single punch. He's a bonobo. They're way strong. The rest of the party was pretty fun, according to Gish. A few months later, the Hollywood Film Awards ceremony took place. Here's an audio recording of the Best Actor portion.
And the winner is Rudolph Valentino for I've Fallen in Love with a Gypsy Against Father's Wishes.
No, Mr. Buttons, please, not on my face.
Unremembered Hollywood was created, written, and produced by Charlie Fonville. Abby Larson was played by Annie Savage. That's me. Original music by Jonathan Dinerstein. With Christine Weatherup as Lillian Gish, Mark Gagliardi as Rudolph Valentino, Seth Morris as Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, Zipporah Cardozo as Norma Talmadge, Justin Wright Neufeld as D.W. Griffith, and Bernard Keller. And in case you hadn't noticed, Unremembered Hollywood is a work of fiction. The names are the names of real people, but they never said these words in this order. No one fought any apes, great or otherwise. And Typhoid Mary versus Jack Johnson is not a real movie, as unjust as that is.